Hello, everyone. I'm very excited today to bring you a very special version of Chip Talks podcast. We're starting to do interviews, and today I have the extreme privilege of interviewing one of who I think is America's greatest personalities, a gentleman by the name of Roger Stone. Welcome to the show, Roger. Very glad to have you today.
Chip, I'm very glad to be with you.
And thank you so much for coming on. And I think, through the course of this show, what we really want to do is try to have a conversation. And I know you're really not used to having these type of conversations, but a conversation more around medical cannabis and your thoughts around medical cannabis. And I know you have some experience there. So do you want to talk a little bit about your experience as long as you're comfortable with it?
Sure, I'm happy to. First of all, I'm a libertarian conservative. So I have been in favor of outright legalization of cannabis for more than 30 years. I also am a great critic of the 1994 crime bill. It was written by then Senator Joe Biden, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and signed by Bill Clinton, which criminalized the first-time nonviolent crime of possession of small amounts of drugs for personal use. The war on drugs, as originally configured under Richard Nixon, targeted drug dealers, drug traffickers, drug kingpins. It wasn't until Joe Biden came along where the end user, who if they have a drug abuse problem, they belong in drug treatment programs, but not in incarceration, became the norm. This has destroyed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives and families. So I'm a harsh critic of that. People say, well, what? But you came into politics under Nixon, who launched the war on drugs. Well, I've written 2 biographies on Nixon. I harshly criticized the war on drugs in those books, if you ever bother to read them. But I'm even more critical of the prison industrial complex, if you want to call it that decided to criminalize, or I should say, force the harsh mandatory penalties for the first-time nonviolent crime of possession. This takes all discretion away from judges to look at an individual situation. So let's just say a single mother with 3 kids working 2 jobs is busted with a small amount of marijuana in her purse. Does that merit jail time? It certainly shouldn't, but in some instances it has, and it does. So I'm an advocate. I'm an advocate for absolute, total legalization, but I'm also a political realist. So we could start just by rescheduling cannabis. It should not be on the Schedule 1 schedule with dangerous drugs like heroin, for example. And that could be done with the stroke of a pen. That's a good place to start, just to deschedule it, decriminalize it. So if you were caught with marijuana in a state where it was illegal to have it, you'd get a ticket, like a parking ticket. I think that'd be a reasonable start. Now, in the state of Florida, where for many years I have supported medicinal marijuana as a first step, it's really ironic. The only reason it was ever approved here because the legislature would never take action. John Morgan, who's an active Democrat, but also a friend of mine, used his own resources to put it on the ballot in a constitutional amendment. The first time he put it on the ballot was very narrowly defeated. In Florida, you need 2/3 of the vote to amend the Constitution. Frankly,
it got 59%, right? It needed 60.
Came tantalizingly close.
Yep.
But frankly, there were flaws in the initial proposal. It was not all that well constructed. And also, it was never advocated on a bipartisan basis. In a state with as many Republicans in it as Florida, you needed Republican votes to pass it. The polls were encouraging, by the way. The polls showed almost 65% of Republicans recognized that medicinal value or that cannabis had true medicinal value. But the campaign was really kind of one-sided. Many people viewed it as an extracurricular effort to gin up Democratic turnout and turnout among younger voters. It got completely gummed up in a gubernatorial race. To his credit, Morgan, instead of just going home, fixed all of those imperfections in his proposal, came back 2 years later, ran a more bipartisan campaign, including some Republican voices for advocacy, and this time it passed. Incredibly, the Republicans in the Florida legislature insisted that if you obtained medicinal marijuana, you couldn't smoke it, that you could only vape it or ingest it. Well, that's
real quick. Interestingly, the same thing happened here when we passed our law in 2018. They tried to keep smokable marijuana out of the law, but that you guys got that back in, right? Florida got that back.
Yes, thanks again to Morgan, who fought it in court. So first of all, it's discriminatory. I would argue it might even be racist. Not everybody can afford a vape device. And as you know, the edibles can be somewhat expensive. Look, Israel, as you know, uses cannabis to treat PTSD in their soldiers. This whole idea that there's no science, well, there's no science because the medical establishment, the FDA and others, they've never conducted a test that was adequate in terms of the type, the usage, and so on. It's like a vicious cycle. So we can't approve it because we don't have any research, and we can't have any research because it's not approved. It's a joke. The real medical emergency in this country today are opioids. Opioids are what are dangerous. Cannabis is an all-natural product grown in the earth. That's because God wants you to have it. I'm convinced of that. I actually was educated about this when my own father was dying of cancer, and when he had no appetite and no will to live. And my sister and I, yes, we acted illegally to get him marijuana. He smoked it. I think it prolonged his life. It certainly made the period in which he was clearly terminal but still alive far more manageable. So I learned then that cannabis has many medicinal benefits, and I became an advocate. Unfortunately, some people on the left think they own marijuana. See, nobody owns marijuana. You can be a conservative, you can be a libertarian, you can even be a Trump supporter and be an advocate for legalization, or be an advocate for decriminalization, or be an advocate for rescheduling. Nobody owns marijuana. I remember very distinctly, I spoke at a conference in New York, a cannabis exposition. My speech was very well received, despite the fact that most of the people there did not share my political point of view. But I wasn't there to talk about politics. I was there to talk about cannabis and its medicinal value and the need to legalize it. When I went to speak for the same group in California, there was a boycott. There was a huge protest about the fact that I was speaking, not based on my views on cannabis, but just because of who I was. So they canceled my speech.
Do you think?
Therefore, I rented the hall across the street from the exposition. I gave my speech anyway, and several hundred people showed up, which I was edified about.
Attaboy. Do you find it interesting? I mean, that, you have kind of 80% of us now, I think, would support medical marijuana. And that is a very common demographic. That's, right-wing Christians. It doesn't really matter how you slice it. It's about 80% medical. So it's interesting to me, just politically, when you look at states and then you look at nationally, 80% of us, that's a huge whopping majority of all. We're saying we support this. And yet our government, those that we entrust, those that we elect to govern us, completely ignore the issue. Or if they engage on the issue, it's usually to kind of take away rights that we've already won.
Yeah.
I just find that. Do you think that that's driven by? It's obviously driven by money, but
It's totally driven by political contributions from Big Pharma.
yeah,
Big Pharma is probably among the most influential special interests in the country. They spend lavishly to protect their monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't really matter what the people think. The politicians respond to campaign dollars. And I think that explains why the popular will here is not being followed. Look, it was back in 2015 when I talked to candidate Donald Trump about this, and he has no experience personally with cannabis. And he said, well, what do you think? And I said, look, it's a states' rights issue. How about just letting the people decide? How about putting your own personal view? Because I think he would not vote for it if it were on the ballot in the state that he lived. But put your own personal view aside and take the position that the states should decide. There are many veterans who are using it to treat PTSD. There are many people using it to treat various maladies. And why not let the people decide? That's his position today. And that I hope will certainly be in his position in this upcoming election. Now, would I like to get him to deschedule it? Yes, I would. Haven't had that conversation with him in several years. I certainly intend to. But again, let me give you a perfect example of how Big Pharma moves in to undo the will of the people. Here in Florida, when the voters approved it, first the legislature tried to say, well, you can't smoke it, you can only vape it or ingest it. Fortunately, the courts knocked that down. But then they set up a regulatory and distribution system which makes it as difficult and as expensive as possible for you to actually get the cannabis. So under the system set up by the Republicans initially, to own a dispensary or to grow marijuana, to grow cannabis, you had to have been grandfathered with a nursery license for 30 consecutive uninterrupted years. So in other words, hand the monopoly over to those exact people in the agriculture community who have been blocking the legalization for decades. Fortunately, that was changed. Then they set up a system in which you have to go to a doctor, a certifying doctor, can't just be any doctor, a certifying doctor. There's a limited number of them. These certifying doctors are like the old judges. They ride a circuit. So on Monday, we're in Boca Raton. On Tuesday, we're in Fort Lauderdale. On Wednesday, we're in Hialeah. On Thursday, we're in the Keys. So you have to calibrate your schedule to see one of these doctors. You have to bring them all of your medical records. They have to review all of your medical records. Then you pay for that visitation. You also then, if they agree, you pay for essentially a license, a permit, a membership card, call it whatever you want, to be able to go to a state dispensary. But they can only prescribe cannabis for a very limited number of specific illnesses. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, sure, HIV, cancer, multiple sclerosis, yes. Pain in your lower back, unacceptable. Depression, unacceptable. Anxiety, unacceptable. So they can only prescribe for an extremely limited number of illnesses. Now, so you paid $300 to the doctor. You've gotten your card. That's, I think, another $200. You're now $500 in. You still don't have any grass. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now you get your prescription. You go to the dispensary. They fill it. You pay for your actual prescription. Let's just say it's another $200. Let's say. Okay. Now you're $700 in. You utilize your medicinal cannabis. Now you need more. Well, you've got to go all the way back to the beginning of the system again. You have to see the doctor. The doctor has to review your medical records. Then they renew your card. That costs more. Then you're back at the same dispensary. So you see, they make it as difficult and as expensive as possible to discourage use. So what person is not going to go down to the gas station at the end of the street where they can get, first of all, superior cannabis, and they can just pay cash and not have to turn over all their medical records. Also, it's not clear what the state does with those medical records. You don't show them to them and get them back. It doesn't work that way. You have to fill out all these forms, which means there's a database somewhere that has all of your medical records in it. It's a classic example of the way pressure from big pharma stops the will of the people, because here they voted overwhelmingly to make it available.
Yep. It's like, we're going to create, we have this medical system over here. We're never going to let it in the medical system. We'll create this alternative system over here that's so hard and expensive and wacky to, access, that we're going to try to discourage use. I agree with you. I do think, though, interestingly, you brought up descheduling and Schedule 3. And hopefully you will have that conversation with Trump again, because I think that I don't know if there is a negative argument there other than why don't we just, completely deschedule everything. That will bring pharma into cannabis. And that's kind of, as much as we're kind of talking bad about some pharma, there's certainly good pharma companies that are developing natural products and developing, doing the right thing, let's say. And those are the guys that we want, in the marijuana industry. But they won't, in what world would you spend $1 billion to develop something that's unsafe, has no medical value, and is horribly addictive? And that's what Schedule 1 says right now.
I remember very distinctly after Donald Trump was elected, and his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, announced that he was going to revoke
the Cole Amendment.
One of the few things that Barack Obama had done right, a memorandum by Attorney General Eric Holder, who said that in those states where cannabis was legalized by the state, that they would not prosecute people for possession under federal law, since federal law and state law contradicted each other. So one of the few things that I think Obama did right. Jeff Sessions kept threatening to revoke that law and to start prosecuting people who were legally obtaining cannabis in their states under the state's medical cannabis laws. And I told Trump about it, and he seemed confused. And he said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Good Lord, he talks about it constantly. He's obsessed with it. He lives in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I'm going to be honest with you. It's turning a lot of people off, turning a lot of young people, turning out a lot of veterans, turning a lot of libertarians, turning a lot of people off." He said, "What should I do about it?" I said, "You should tell him to knock it off." How about just telling him to knock it off? It's not consistent with Donald Trump's policy, which is the states should decide. Ultimately, fortunately, Sessions left, and that was the end of his war on cannabis.
Yeah, and that was not, I remember that time very well. And he revoked something called the Cole Amendment. And the Cole Amendment was a very thin thread that kind of kept, the DEA out of California and Colorado and all those states that were legal at the time. So you're a Christian, right?
I am. So I was originally baptized as a Catholic at St. Mary's Church in Norwalk, Connecticut. I had all of my sacraments, my first Holy Communion, my Holy Confirmation at St. Aloysius in New Canaan, Connecticut. But Chip, I'll be honest with you, when I went to Washington, by the way, I went to Mass every Sunday as long as I lived under my parents' roof. But as soon as I went to college, I moved very far from the Lord. And then when I was tremendously successful as a political consultant and lobbyist, I lived a pretty wild lifestyle, and I wandered far from my faith. I always considered that I believed in God, but I was not a good Christian. And when I went through the crucible of being prosecuted and persecuted for lying about Russian collusion that, I'm sorry, never really existed, and even Robert Mueller later admitted that in his long redacted hidden report that he'd found no evidence of Russian collusion or WikiLeaks collaboration or any other crime on my part. It was in that period when I realized that I was going to be railroaded, that I was going to be gagged, which I was, and then lynched, that I restored my faith, and I was basically redeemed in the blood of the cross. Now, I know that reporters of the New York Times and Media Matters for America and all these other elitist groups, they make jokes about this. See, they think professing your Christianity, your belief in God, your belief in Jesus Christ, your belief in the Holy Spirit, they think it's some kind of joke, or they think it's some kind of head fake or some kind of pose. I don't really care what they think. I only care what he thinks. I am a Christian. I'm a different person than I was just 5 years ago. Am I perfect? I'm very far from perfect. Am I a sinner? Most definitely. Do I still make mistakes? Every single day. Who among us does not? There's only one who is perfect. But it's changed my outlook. There are many people who tried to destroy me. The old Roger Stone, the Sicilian Roger Stone, because I'm half Sicilian, he would hate those people. Now I actually, and it's hard, but I actually pray for them, because that's what the Bible instructs us, to forgive those who have trespassed against us. Is it difficult? It's extraordinarily difficult, but it's what the Lord calls on us to do. So I talk about it quite a bit. I'm very happy. I now go to Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, which is an evangelical Christian church. Still consider myself a Catholic. I think once you're baptized as a Catholic, you're a Catholic for life, and you'll die as a Catholic. I know there's some at my church now may not be happy with that, but see, I kind of look in more ecumenical terms. I don't really care whether you're a Methodist or a Lutheran or a Presbyterian or a Catholic. If you believe in the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, if you believe in the Holy Trinity, if you believe in the Holy Spirit, then you are my brother or my sister. The Catholic Church itself as an entity is extraordinarily corrupt. This current Pope, I think, is a Pope. I don't even think he's a legitimate Pope. I think the last legitimate Pope was Benedict. I think that he was forced out because he's not down with the globalist agenda. But when I see the Pope out advocating same-sex marriage, when I see the Pope advocating transgenderism, when I see the Pope saying, I love this, that the Bible, or he said Jesus Christ condemned those who would own private property. The Bible doesn't say that. Christ never said that. Christ revered hard work and ingenuity. He did not ever oppose capitalism. He threw the money changers out of the temple, as you may remember. So this current Pope, who I think he's a puppet. I don't recognize him. I could be excommunicated for that from the Catholic Church tomorrow, but you know what? I don't care. Here's why. I can never be excommunicated from Jesus Christ.
That's right.
I can never be excommunicated from God. And I don't think you have to talk to God or pray to God through a third party. I think that any person can get down on their knees and have a conversation and pray to God at any time. You don't need anybody as an interpreter. That's how I feel about it.
Do you think I want to ask you two things about your Christianity. So one is cannabis and kind of how your, cannabis kind of usage and your cannabis views are treated in the Christian community. But then also kind of about DC. And to me, it seems like it's almost like the more truly Christian you are, the lower you go in DC, the more, evil and kind of satanic you are, the higher you rise. And I'm wondering if that's changing, if you feel like that's changing.
Let me take them in order. I made a joke about this, but it's not really a joke. Cannabis is grown in the earth. It's an all natural substance. It's been used for centuries by people for various illnesses and maladies. There's no inconsistency between the use of cannabis and believing in Jesus Christ. And anybody who says there is, I think, greatly misguided. The alternative, let me remind you once again, is opioids, mm-hmm. which are destructive, which will kill you. My own wife has had, as you know, a horrific fight with stage 4 cancer. I don't believe that she could have survived that fight without a number of the cancer-fighting properties in cannabis, which are proven. This is not conjecture. They are proven. Yep. Look, I'm just grateful that when she was fighting cancer and we were destitute, flat, broke, people sent us some of the finest and the highest quality THC-based cancer-fighting supplements that you can imagine as gifts, because we didn't have the money to pay for them. She couldn't sleep. She could never have survived. I'm happy to say, through the healing power of Jesus Christ, she's now 3 years cancer-free. And yes, THC played an important role in her comeback. That's just a fact. As far as go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I study this. I mean, I'm top 5 in the world, let's say, on the endocannabinoid system. So you're absolutely right. There's mechanisms of action that are associated with pain, let's say. So if you look at opioids and kind of what they do to mitigate that, and cannabis does a better job of that. And again, there's certain kind of conditions. Cannabis needs to be more medicinal. Definitely, it's kind of generic right now, but then it can absolutely be targeted toward cancer. And as you just expressed, one of the coolest things in the cannabis kind of community is that if somebody does have cancer and they're, a lot of us don't have money, a lot of us are, disadvantaged for whatever reason, the community will always come together and help people, as you've experienced. And I think that's one of the coolest things about the whole, cannabis community. But anyway, yeah.
As to your second question, Washington is a killing field. I hope I never have to go there again. Our politics is not just competitive now. I mean, when I was in my heyday as a political strategist and consultant, I had friends who were Democrats who did the same thing. We ate together, we drank together, we joked each other, we teased each other. Sometimes they beat us, sometimes we beat them. But today they want to destroy you. They want to destroy your family. They want to impoverish you. They want to send you to prison. It's sick. It really is sick. There is no civility at all. The role of the media has changed entirely. It's very hard to name any major mainstream media outlet that are actually practicing journalism. They're all incredibly corrupted, and they're pushing narratives that are entirely false. I do want to mention that I've had very good results with CBD. And I'm going to say this not because you asked me to, because you didn't, but your true MedX products, particularly Rewind, which is a tincture, and also your Rest product and your Focus product, those have helped me enormously. They're of the highest possible quality. I find them to be extraordinarily effective, and I would recommend them to anyone. Your entire line intrigues me. I've tried a number of your products, but those 3 particularly I have found to be extraordinarily beneficial. I have a terrible time with insomnia, but your Rest product combined with the tincture Rewind, very, very effective. Not only do I sleep through the night, but I wake up rested and rejuvenated.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I don't know why you'd have a rest problem with, being woken up at 3 a.m. with the, feds knocking at your door. So it's just, it's amazing what you have been subjected to, knowing you as a human and knowing that, I'm sure you had a lot of fun being the top lobbying firm in DC in the 80s, but then past that, you've developed some maturity, and, the person that I know is not that person. So it just amazes me, your resilience to hold up, to the stuff that's thrown at you every day. So do you feel like the kind of cannabinoids and CBD products help you with that emotional stress and kind of help you with the, all that you have to deal with?
Well, without any question. I mean, I've gotten some relief from the use of mushrooms in tiny doses. Look, the alternative is Xanax. Xanax works great in the beginning, but if you do any research at all, you will find that in essence, it'll actually make the problems you're trying to alleviate even worse. In the end, it'll make you more anxious. In the end, it will make you more depressed. So I found that mushrooms in tiny doses, taken properly, have really alleviated my anxiety and my stress. Look, every single day there are things published about me that are just simply not true. They're false. and you get tired of answering the same question over and over again. Oh, Roger Stone is the guy who stole the 2000 election for George W. Bush. No, here's what I did. I stopped the Democrats in Miami-Dade County from counting the same pile of ballots that they had recounted 3 times. And they wanted to count them again, seeking in essence to manufacture new votes by saying, well, you can tell that this person meant to vote for Al Gore. I didn't shut down anything. I stopped them from taking those ballots into a private room with no windows and no doors in violation of the state sunshine law and trying to manufacture new votes. I didn't shut anything down. I called them out. But that's not the way you will read it. People who want to hear the truth on any of these things can go to stonezone.com, stonezone.com. I have a rich archive there of everything I've written. I do a WABC New York radio show every Sunday from 4 to 6. Doesn't matter where you live, Oklahoma, doesn't matter where you live. You can listen to it on WABCradio.com. If you want to see my daily net-based show, you can go to rumble.com/Roger Stone and see the Stone Zone. So I'm out there every day. It's a huge amount of work. You do get tired of responding because here's the thing about the hysterical left in America. Doesn't matter how debunked, disproved, or discredited any of their bullshit is, they'll just come back and recycle it 3 weeks later like they never heard the answer. So there's so many places that I could go with this, but it really does get grinding to keep answering the same questions over and over again. Perfect example. Stone was in touch with Russian intelligence, and he coordinated the release of the WikiLeaks disclosures about Hillary Clinton and the DNC. I had a Twitter direct message online exchange of 28 words with somebody claiming the persona of Guccifer 2.0. That entire exchange, based on its content, which I published, shows no evidence of coordination of anything. And it took place 3 months after WikiLeaks had already released all of that material. So it's chronologically impossible for that to be nefarious or wrong. And thirdly, I'm sorry, just because John Brennan or the government who lies about cannabis says that Guccifer 2.0 is a Russian hacker, we've seen no evidence of that. That's a unsupported claim. So I just use that as a perfect example. My exchange with this persona is benign, and I released it. I published it. Read it for yourself. There's nothing in there that indicates any exchange of information of any value, or more importantly, that I was any way complicit in the release of that material. Now, what was it that Julian Assange released that was false or inauthentic or not accurate? Nothing whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So he's now being tortured. He's now being prosecuted. Why? Because he showed up the war machine. He showed that we have gone to foreign war with our treasure and the lives of Americans on the basis of no truth. Yep. I was supposed to be on this debate the other night with this guy, Richard Painter, who was the ethics officer in the George W. Bush White House. Now, in the end, I couldn't make it because my wife was ill. She had a tough day. Alex Jones, of all people, jumped in to take my place. But what are the ethics of bringing the country to war in Iraq on a false claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, which they never had? How many hundreds of thousands of people died over that lie? So don't tell me you love George W. Bush and lecture me about my ethics, please.
Yeah, and you've done a pretty good tell-all book about the Bush family, which is interesting. So do you think and by the way, all of Roger's links and stuff will be under, in the information about this podcast, so it'll be in the description. So you'll be able to get to Roger and listen to his shows and things by the links in the description of the video. So Roger, do you think, there's, at least in the circles that I run around in, we're really pushing for reform here for Schedule III, in cannabis. We're pushing in every way that we can possibly push. You have close access to the man. who quite possibly is going to be our next president. What do you think? A couple of questions. So Schedule 3, which you've already addressed, and you mentioned you had not talked to him about that recently. But do you see him just generally personality-wise? Do you see him reforming like things? So I know he won't really touch states' rights with marijuana, but if he does Schedule 3, that would indicate kind of a reform of the FDA. The FDA would need to manage that likely. Do you see that happen? Do you see him reforming, a lot of these regulatory?
I think there's a good probability. I mean, look, right now, he's got a little bit on his mind. They're trying to send him to jail for 700 years. They're trying to destroy him financially, trying to keep him off the ballot. Now would not be the time to raise this question. The time to raise this question is when he is elected. We already know his position. He's for states' rights, and he's already said if the people want medicinal marijuana and they vote for it, or their elected officials approve it, they should have it. It's a good start. I'm optimistic about this. I know Congressman Matt Gaetz, who's also an advocate for descheduling or unscheduling, as well as ultimately legalization, has talked to him about it as well. So I think it's a clean slate. I think he has now a healthy distrust of some of those in government who claim the mantle of science, but who may not have been entirely honest with him. So I think there's a good chance that he'll review all these issues, and hopefully we'll get some meaningful reform. In the meantime, we need to reform our banking laws so that those who are legitimately in the business can use a bank, can do commerce. As you know, that's the other way that the people's will has been thwarted, which is to say, okay, well, you can be in the marijuana business, but you just can't have a bank account.
And not only that, it's funny, my wife and I did hold, we don't anymore, but we held the commercial licenses here in Oklahoma. And we moved, this was last year and a half ago, and we wanted to open a bank account in the town that we moved to, just a personal bank account. We could not open, and this was the bank's policy, this wasn't federal policy, but we couldn't open a personal bank account because we held marijuana licenses, one, and two, somehow they knew that information right off. Which made me damn uncomfortable. But yeah, we absolutely need to reform that. So anything else that you want to kind of say to my folks here, my cannabis and endocannabinoid listeners?
I guess it's just this, which is to say, try to avoid just believing stereotypes. Don't think that just because someone is a conservative Republican or a libertarian Republican, that automatically means that they're opposed to rescheduling or descheduling cannabis, or that they're opposed to reforming the banking laws, or that they're opposed to outright legalization, because that may not be the case. Look, Rand Paul did phenomenal work with Donald Trump to make hemp and hemp farming legal again. I give Rand Paul huge credit for that. And I think he will ultimately be an ally in the effort to deschedule or reschedule cannabis. So don't jump to conclusions. Don't mix partisan politics. By the way, this goes even, don't assume that every Trump supporter is against legalization. I don't make the assumption that everybody who's for Joe Biden favors changes, more favorable changes in cannabis law, because it's not necessarily the case. But recognize, whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat, whether you're for Biden or Trump or even for Robert F. Kennedy, we have one common enemy. It is Big Pharma. Big Pharma is the enemy. They're not about health. They're not about wellness. They're about promoting sickness. See, they don't make any money unless people are sick. So they don't want cures to our worst diseases. If they find products, if they find medicines that are beneficial, they don't want to patent them and sell them. They want to lock them away, because they make their money over a lack of health. They make their money off of illness. Big Pharma is one of the greatest menaces on the face of the planet. They've made billions and billions and billions of dollars just in recent years based on false information. And that is, no matter what your politics, that's the common enemy, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think we got to flip it. We got to, get back to God, and God lives in natural products. God doesn't live in the pharmaceutical system. This has been great, Roger. I very much appreciate you coming on this show. And this is a good place to leave it, I think. So we'll leave it here. Hopefully we'll have you back on again sometime soon, and just wish you the best of luck with 45, with everything that you're doing on that campaign, and for you personally.
Thank you, Chip. And again, folks can go to stonezone.com. You can subscribe there for absolutely free, and you can see everything I'm up to. Thanks again for having me, and God bless you.